Today's topic is focused on establishing performance goals between manufacturers and distributors. Joining me today is Denis Cantin, Principal Consultant with True North Health. Thank you so much for joining me today, Denis.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so as we start with this topic around key performance indicators or KPIs, my first question is when medtech manufacturers and distributors start working together in a market, how important is it to establish KPIs?
So setting and tracking KPIs are a critical element in developing a strong and successful relationship with a new partner. They are quantifiable metrics that reflect how well an organization is achieving towards its stated goals and objectives. KPIs are more than just numbers reported out weekly, monthly, quarterly. They enable you to understand the performance of, in this case, your distributor partner, so that both parties can make critical adjustments in the execution in achieving the strategic goals. Establishing and measuring the right KPIs will help you achieve your results a lot faster. Now, the approach that I recommend is meeting with, in this case again, the distributor partner, and collaborate on defining the KPIs. First, list out a set of business objectives that you've asked them to contribute to. Next, identify goals that are manageable and the ones that would be tough to reach. Once those are defined, come up with a healthy balance of realistic but yet ambitious and set those goals. You'll find a distributor partner will be more eager to accomplish something when they feel that they've had a voice in creating it. So an example, if one of the goals is to provide superior customer service, you could use a KPI to target the number of customer support requests that remain unsatisfied at the end of every week. This will measure your progress towards that objective. Now, just a side note, oftentimes the question I get queried on is what's the optimum number of KPIs? On average, it's between 4 and 10. I realize that that's a big spread. If you're again focused on sales and ops, perhaps it's 4. If you include marketing and financial metrics, then perhaps it's closer to 10. But just make sure that you have enough to measure how your team or organization is performing against those key objectives.
That's great. So Denis, I know you have background working both on the manufacturing side and on the distributor side, and now in your current role, you work with both and bring them together in various markets. How do you get manufacturers and distributors to agree on a set of KPIs, whether it's 4 or 10 or somewhere in between?
Well, so I like to default to the SMART fundamentals, the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So, be clear on each KPI. Make sure that it's something that can be measured. Make sure that it's not too optimistic, like that it's achievable. The relevance of it, you got to make sure that both groups are actually very happy with it. It's not just a metric onto its own. And time bound. Let's agree on the timelines. And again, those timelines should be in lockstep with the frequency of how often you sit down and meet. We'll get to that a little later. Some of the examples I'd like to offer the group is from a sales perspective. At the top of the sales funnel, track the name of sale or the number of sales qualified leads. Measure the opportunity to win ratio, and then ultimately the sales revenue versus the target. On an ops side, time to ship, the percentage of sales loss to out of stock, so back order management, the percentage of on-time shipment. So that will actually have a big reflection on your ability to grow your business sustainably.
And Denis, what's your perspective on whether we need to agree on KPIs before we sign a contract, or is it okay to wait until after the contract to then agree on KPIs?
I'm a big believer, right, that we, that it be negotiated, as part of the contract negotiations. Helps the manufacturer, and in this case, again, a distributor partner, measure progress, and achieve goals against that contract. When designed and used optimally, KPIs play a role in driving behavior and actions. And so my fear is that if you, bake the contract and then it's an afterthought, then it will be seen as secondary. Where if it's actually part of the contract negotiations, then you can refer to it, and it's significant.
So if we agree together on somewhere between 4 and 10 meaningful KPIs, and we do so before the contract is signed, now we sign the contract, it's time to measure and track those goals. How do you recommend companies, manufacturers, and distributors, how do you recommend that they do that?
Well, the first is to have a plan on how you're going to capture the information that is needed. A few examples: net profit requires a different set of data than, say, customer satisfaction, which, and both in those instances require two different systems. You should establish who's going to collect the data and how frequently. Sales data through a CRM or other can usually be collected rather quickly, where a KPI that requires data to be collated from a number of different sources, that might be best kept for a monthly measurement. So you also need to verify the data. So, make sure that it's accurate, that it's actually been vetted, and that it covers all the requirements of that KPI. And one last point on measurement and tracking them is communicate the outcomes of the KPIs clearly to everyone who's concerned. And, I would recommend setting up a performance dashboard to measure progress, efficiently. As a footnote to your listeners, in my personal view, myCaribou has a great functionality when it comes to providing a dashboard that has the framework, easy to push out. There's no question it's one source of truth, and it's important to have.
So once we've established these KPIs, and we're now, you make some great points about the importance of tracking those and agreeing on where the source of that data is coming from. How often should we sit down and review them together and discuss the result of those KPIs that we're tracking together?
So as a rule of thumb, reviewing, anywhere from 1 to 3 months, so either monthly or quarterly. I think that, points to keep in mind is that if it's a new relationship, then you may want to look at it more often than just say quarterly. But again, it'll all depend on the pace of the business. And, note to everyone, in the early days, give it enough time so that the data can be accumulated in a meaningful way. Reviewing KPIs too often or too early may not give you the complete picture and lead to mistakes and assumptions, on how everyone's performing. In addition to the contract manager, I think it's important that others, such as executive sponsors, participate in these reviews. So, the reason for it is it'll facilitate, if ever faced with having to escalate an issue for resolution process.
And how often do you think you should look at those KPIs and potentially reset expectations around them, and perhaps even introduce some new KPIs?
So I recommend reviewing KPI relevance and making either omissions or changes, additions every 6 months, with the caveat that should be done within the first 2 years of any new partnership. Now, if it's an established partnership and it's now, beyond that time frame, then I think every 12 months is satisfactory.
Great. And we talked earlier about KPIs and how they relate or tie back to contracts. What happens if we aren't meeting the KPIs? What are your thoughts there?
So KPIs clearly help contract managers measure progress and achieve goals against contracts that they've actually penned and managed. And when designed and used optimally, KPIs play that role in driving actions and can have significant effects. KPIs that aren't implemented properly end up being, too ambitious or not ambitious at all. They provide very little fuel to the team who's expected to meet the annual goals. So, with little to no understanding behind each KPI, you'll find yourself left deflated and certainly unmotivated with an unmotivated team. I think that, real-time and honest, open communication is crucial. And it's, again, have all the right constituents at the table that can act, if necessary, if there are challenges. And, escalation in real time is really important. So, if it's not happening, don't put it off to next quarter or next month, act on it right away.
Right. So Danny, you've been you've been in this space for over 20 years and had a lot of success in driving business growth for manufacturers and distributors. I know you mentioned a few examples earlier, but can you give us some of the examples of KPIs you've used previously that have really helped you drive successful manufacturer distributor partnerships?
Certainly. So on a sales side, within the sales funnel, you want to measure the sales qualified leads. You then want to move on to opportunity to win ratio, and then ultimately sales revenue versus the target. On the upside, I believe that order fulfillment accuracy is crucial. On-time delivery, and then percentage of sales lost due to out of stocks. So back order management. But from a sales and ops perspective, those would be crucial.
Great. And I know we've purposely kept sales targets separate from KPIs here today as we think about performance indicators that aren't just setting sales goals for the quarter and tracking those. One of the arguments I've heard though is from manufacturers and distributors is when sales are on target, when things are going well between the two partners, it's okay to not worry about KPIs and not track or measure or agree on KPIs. What are your thoughts on that sentiment?
Well, at first glance, in that scenario, you may believe it's a good thing. Ignoring KPIs on a mid to long term means that you're going to be flying blind. So I don't agree with ignoring KPIs in the long term. Reviewing them on a regular basis allows you to conduct a deep dive on what's really driving that revenue growth. And, a scenario that I'll offer to the viewers and listeners is that, you could be faced with the fact that the large portion of that revenue growth is being driven by, say, one or two select tier one customers, or perhaps being driven by one or two, sales team members who are on their game. But by just looking at the top line number, you'll overlook the fact that there may be tier two customers right now that are hesitant or are not adopting as quickly, or that the rest of the sales organization is right now forgetting about it. And so it's really crucial to delve into those details, and the frequency will allow you to do that. So having good working knowledge and visibility to the sales funnel, to the sales cycle length, to the conversion rate, and then later down the also retention rate of customers will give you a much better picture. Because again, sustainable growth requires a little bit of time to build, and you don't want to just hang your hat on, say, a bolus of a couple of wins at a given period of time.
So before we wrap up, just one final question for you. If you think about all the over the years and working with manufacturers and distributors, many of whom will be watching this podcast and trying to take away information from it, what would your final sort of words of advice be around managing key performance indicators with manufacturers and distributors?
Well, as we've kind of touched through these questions today, ensuring that they are part and parcel of the contract negotiations, having a system once you've established what they are to measure, and then having a platform to use so that both groups can access and revisit and measure and report back. And again, kudos to my Caribou team, because I think that that functionality has certainly been covered and would offer people great benefit. But there are other systems as well, but I make sure that you've got that going.
Well, Denny, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I know it's the morning in Australia and the evening here in the US, so I appreciate you being flexible and spending some time with me and providing a lot of great insight around KPIs. Thank you so much for your time.
Craig, thanks for your time, and to your listeners and viewers, thank you.